What's up everyone, I'm Darkside Phil and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series where I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding the latest video game releases. Now this is a special episode because number one, I'm not going to have any video footage in this episode. If you want to see video footage of my playthroughs of either of the games that are the subject of this episode, head over to DSP Gaming, which is my YouTube gaming channel for video footage of games. I've got full playthroughs of both of these games that we're going to be talking about today, okay? Including both their single-player campaigns and their multiplayer. So you can go check that out over there. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to review God of War Ascension and Gears of War Judgment in as brief of a manner as possible. Because number one, I'm actually pressed for time. But number two, I really feel there's not a lot to say about either of these games. And it's funny that you're like, Phil, how can you talk about two completely different genres of games in one review? It's this simple. Both of these games came out at the same time of the year. Both of these games, within one week by the way, both of these games are prequels. Both of these games are kind of weak, and in fact, I'm going to go as far to say both of these games are the weakest installments of these games in their entire series, to the point where a lot of people who bought these games are so disappointed, they're saying these just seem like cheap cash-ins that the game makers made because they realized, oh shit, you know, the new consoles are coming out later this year or early next year, so rather than do another official installment in the series like God of War 4 or Gears of War 4, they said, let's just do shitty prequels and just kind of dial it in rather than put in a lot of effort so that we can make some money this year. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to go one by one through the games and talk about the similarities between them and when my final score. So, God of War Ascension. A game that's supposed to be a prequel to the God of War trilogy. It's supposed to explore Kratos' past and, you know, how did his wife and daughter get killed, and him getting chased by Ares because he doesn't want to work for Ares, even though he's what made the commitment that he would. But that's really not what the game ends up being. The real plot of the game is that Kratos is being chased by three Furies who work for Ares, and they're trying to make him work for Ares by kidnapping him or whatever, seducing him different ways. And the game starts in medias res, which means you actually start in the middle of the, or near the end of the story. Then it has a repeated series of flashbacks over the course of the game, where you actually play the past of how Kratos got to be with the Furies near the end of the game. The game is exactly what you would expect from a God of War game. You've got your combos with your chains, you've got heavy attacks, as you can grapple and do execution kills, you've got melee weapons that you find throughout the course of the game that you can use. The game really sticks to the formula of God of War, but actually has less in it than previous God of War games. And what I mean by that is there's less epic boss battles. In fact, if I remember correctly, there's only 3 boss fights in the game, and only one of them is really one of those large epic scale boss fights that you expect from God of War, and it's at the end of the game. There's limited combo ability. What they actually did in this game, they instituted something called a rage meter, where the more that you attack and rack up combos and hits while dodging and not getting hit, you build up a meter. And when the meter gets to a max level, you can use it to either do accentuated, more damaging attacks, or you can use it to use combos that normally don't work, but you unlock through experience points in the souls that you find throughout the game. The problem being, you don't always have the rage meter filled, and a lot of the times you do get hit, in which case you can't use a lot of the combos that you end up unlocking during the game, and they end up being completely worthless, okay? There are no variety in the attacks, really. You always use the blades in this game. It's not like the other God of War games where you get, you get the Icarus wings, and you get the rock fists, and you get different weapons. No, in this game you're always using the chains. Now there are variations. There's 4 different kinds of chains that you can use, including electric, fire, ice, and shadow. And then later on you do get a couple other abilities, like the ability to freeze a certain opponent, or the ability to make a shadow clone of yourself who will fight during the fight, basically doubling up and adding for extra juggles and damage, okay? But really at its core, it's almost like a watered down version of the combat of other God of War games. Now, the game's campaign is about 8 hours long, and honestly, the story is a story that didn't need to be told. Do I care that Kratos fought 3 Furies before the God of War series? Not really. And by the end, you actually kind of feel a little bit empty because it doesn't really add anything to the overall story of Kratos. It doesn't make you know him any better as a person. It really, the whole game does feel like it's kind of dialed in. And honestly, it is the weakest campaign out of all of the God of War games. It's only about, I think it clocks in around 8 hours. But again, less epic boss fights, less complex combat, excuse me. That's not as fun. and it's just not as good. It kind of feels blasé and stale as you play it. You're like, I'm just kind of going through the motions to beat the game. Now, the game does have a multiplayer mode. The multiplayer mode is kind of fun. It's unique. I really don't have much to say about it besides it is kind of a unique thing. I've never really played a multiplayer mode like it, and it does have several modes. Some of it is just deathmatch where you're racking up points. Some of it it's capture the flag. Sometimes you're going up against like a giant AI opponent, like a giant monster or Gorgon or whatever. And it is neat in that regard, and I think a lot of people will enjoy this game because of the multiplayer. But did this game need to be made? And quite honestly, the answer is no, this game did not need to be made. It adds nothing to the series. It's the worst entry in the series, and it really just feels like a cash-in when you play it. Okay? Gears of War Judgment. You're going to hear me reiterate a lot of the stuff I just said about God of War Ascension. Okay? Gears of War Judgment focuses around Baird and his group of kind of ragtag commando squad who, after the war ends, remember there was a big war on planet Earth in the storyline of Gears of War, and when Emergence Day happens, these guys are actually, they come together from all different walks of life. One's a cadet, one's, you know, Cole, who as everyone knows, he used to be a football player. You've got Baird, who's actually like a lieutenant in the COG army, and then you've got this guy Paddock, who actually was for the opposing army in the war that just ended, but they all team up to form a ragtag squad. And what happens is, this campaign of this game focuses on this squad and what they did before the events of the first Gears of War game. Now, this campaign is one of the oddest design choices I've ever played in my life, and here's why. Yes, it still has, you know, the classic Gears gameplay with your active reloading and your same weapons and such, and there are a couple new enemy types in the game. But the game's campaign isn't a fluid story like previous Gears games. In fact, it follows some of the formula of God of War Ascension. That's right, it starts in medias res, which means the game starts near the end of the game. The guys, they're actually on trial for basically mutiny, for disregarding a direct order from their commanding officer, and then you get flashbacks during the course of the game going back to how they ended up doing the mutiny and why they did it and why they're here on trial. So it's the same exact plot device that this game uses, okay? It's a prequel, just like God of War Ascension. It's also a completely unnecessary prequel, because as you go through the course of the game, you realize that none of the events of the campaign really add anything to the story of the God of War universe. It's a complete cash-in. There's no reason for this game to exist. But the thing that really baffles me is that they chose to change the flow of the campaigns of previous Gears of War games that everyone knows works. They break the campaign down into mini-missions, okay? So there's 7 chapters, and each chapter has maybe like 10, I'd say maybe 5 to 10 mini-missions, which really feel more like challenge levels of Horde mode than anything else. So it'll be, oh, okay, you're starting this mini-mission, there's an opportunity to make it harder. And what this is every mini-mission you have a goal, survive, get from point A to point B. But there's also a cog on a wall that you find, and if you find it, it'll tell you there's a modifier that can make this mission harder, and if you do it, you get more stars, okay? Now, stars are your ranking for each mission. The more stars you accumulate, you unlock stuff in the game. So if you get 40 stars, you actually unlock an optional about hour to hour and a half campaign called Aftermath. And that's pretty cool that you unlock some additional content by doing harder difficulties. But overall, outside of that, there's no incentive whatsoever to even want to do the harder difficulties. Once you unlock Aftermath, there's no reason to continue doing it, okay? So each mini-mission is maybe 5 to 10 minutes long, and so what you end up doing, this game actually feels like it should have been made for a portable system, because the reason they do that with portable games, make little short snippet missions, is because they know you don't have a lot of time a lot of the times. Maybe you're in a car, or you're on a train, or you're just playing it for a couple minutes, and they know that that's how portable systems are played a lot of the time, so they make the mission shorter. I have no idea why this game is comprised of some like 50 to 70 mini-missions. It really breaks up the narrative, it really is kind of startling, and it doesn't feel like a Gears of War game. In addition, very similar to God of War Ascension, no big boss fights until the last boss. Very limited amount of variety in the game. It's really, again, not a very good entry to the series. It's boring. It's blasé. You realize that nothing that you're doing really affects anything in the Gears of War series, and you say, why the hell am I even playing this game? It's very odd. Now, the Aftermath campaign, which you unlock once you get the 40 challenge stars, that is about an hour to an hour and a half campaign that supposedly takes place parallel with Gears of War 3. And it's about Baird and his commando squad of Carmine, Cole, and Paddock. They actually intercept Paddock. They go off to try to find a boat so that they can go. I don't even know. I guess at some point in the story of Gears 3, they had to do something with a boat, so they're trying to get this boat. And oddly enough, the Aftermath campaign plays very similarly to the Gears of War campaigns of previous games. It's fluid, it's one solid story that goes from start to finish, rather than having these little mini missions that are very jarring and interrupting. The Aftermath campaign only lasts about an hour and a half. It is about 20 times better than the actual 6.5-hour campaign of the game. So it just makes no sense. It's almost like two completely different dev teams made the game. Oh, wait a minute. Two completely different dev teams did actually make the game. There's Epic Games, who actually makes most of the Gears of War games, and then there's People Can Fly. So I would guarantee you probably what happened here was People Can Fly made the campaign in this game, but they just did it completely differently than the other Gears games, and it sucks. It really does. It's boring, it's repetitive, it's not fun to play, and it's not fun to watch, which I found out when people were watching my stream, and now that the playthrough's up on YouTube. People are saying, Phil, this game sucks. We watched a couple parts, we got bored. We don't want to watch it anymore. And it's the same thing with the gameplay. You play a couple missions, you're like, I'm just going through the motions. What happened with this game? Okay? And then the multiplayer has a new mode called Overrun, which is basically kind of like Team Fortress 2. It's about, you're either playing as the Cogs or the Locust, and basically you pick different classes. Some of them, like the guy who puts down the turret, one of the guys, the guy who heals the other people, just like Team Fortress 2. And the goal is that the Locusts need to attack this area on the map, and the Cog's job is to defend it. And so you get to pick different locusts. You could be the Ticker, or you can be a standard Grunt, or you could be one of the Centipede dudes, which I forget what his actual name is, but one of the Centipede dudes. And the more kills and points you rack up as you're doing this, you get to unlock better classes, and eventually you get to be the even tougher guys, like the guys with the boom shields. And again, very similar to, say, Team Fortress 2. I know that they had a similar mode like this in the last Gears of War as well, so it's really not anything like amazingly new. There's also a survival mode, but I don't think there's any official horde mode, so to speak, which is what one of the favorite features were of the last game. The team deathmatch is identical, pretty much, to the last game. So really, the multiplayer of this game is nothing to write home about. It's more Gears multiplayer. And the other thing that's startlingly apparent, there's only 4 maps. There's only 4 maps. There's 4 maps for Overrun, and there's 4 maps for all of the other modes. So you paid $60 for a shitty campaign that plays nothing like previous Gears campaigns, a multiplayer that is very, very lackluster, with only 4 fucking maps per game mode. And then an hour to hour and a half campaign that's great, but you don't get enough of it because it seems like that's the only thing that Epic Games worked on this game. So these two games are extremely similar. Prequels that didn't need to happen, that add nothing whatsoever to each's respective series, that are boring and blasé. They really feel like not a lot of effort was put into them, okay? Now, in defense of God of War Ascension, at least the campaign is similar to the campaign of other God of War games. It's not like they completely changed the formula of the campaign like they did with Gears of War Judgment. So that at least gives it some points. And the multiplayer is new, it's refreshing because it's something different from other games. It's not like this is the 3rd game in a row that's had this multiplayer. So that at least gives it some points. The game's still not great, but at least it gives the game some points. This game has a campaign that's nothing like the great campaigns of the previous games, and the multiplayer is boring, repetitive, and it's the same as the previous multiplayer and has limited maps. So, honestly, out of the two, this one is better, but that's not saying much because both of them are worse games in their series, okay? So God of War Ascension, all things considered, the fact that it does have a lengthy campaign of 8 hours, the multiplayer is something interesting, but the fact that it is kind of boring, the game did need to exist, I'm going to give God of War Ascension a 7.25, okay? It's not a great game. It's definitely better than any crappy average game, but it's definitely not a great game. So it's okay. I'd probably recommend it for rental if you're a God of War fan. It definitely doesn't warrant a purchase. The multiplayer is not good enough to warrant you to buy this game. This fucking piece of shit is just not a good game. It's jarringly different from previous Gears of War games. It makes no sense why they made those design choices. It's boring, it didn't need to be made, and the multiplayer is repetitive and boring and the same as previous multiplayer except for Overrun, which isn't enough to save the game. This could have been a fucking expansion pack. In fact, when you're playing it, it almost feels like maybe this was supposed to be a DLC for Gears of War 3. Why else would it have a campaign that does tie in with Gears of War 3? So it kind of makes sense that maybe this was supposed to be a DLC, But someone in Microsoft Studios and Epic Games or whoever said, oh, well, shh, hush, hush, we're working on the new Xbox, and we want the next Gears game to be like the system seller, so don't make it yet. Put in a dial-it-in fucking piece of shit prequel so that you can make money this year and just save Gears 4 for the next console. And that's really what it seems like happened here. So Gears of War Judgment, blase, a campaign that's not even as good as previous campaigns, and it's jarringly different because it's all mini missions, an Aftermath campaign that should have been the main campaign of the game but was only an hour long, multiplayer that's repetitive and boring, it's the same old multiplayer, it sucks. This game sucks. Gears of War Judgment, I'm giving a 5 out of 10. It didn't put any effort in. It's barely a game. It's average at best. I give it a 5 out of 10. Do not play this game. Unless you're a hardcore Gears of War fan and you're dying to get your hands on another Gears game because it's been a year and a half, fine, but I still wouldn't pay $60. I would wait 2 weeks, and this game's price will probably drop down to 30 or 20 bucks even. Get it then, play it then, and then just say, fuck it. It's over with. Let's wait for the new consoles to come out so we can actually get good new installments to these series. It's so sad that, you know, this first quarter of 2013, we were all looking forward to games that were coming out. Like, wow, this is really a loaded quarter. But now these games are coming out and we're beginning to see, oh shit, really these games aren't that good. These are like kind of just, we wanted to make money this year, so let's make a shitty game rather than actually put effort into the game. So, God of War Ascension, an unnecessary prequel, but the multiplayer does shine a bit, 7.25. Gears of War Judgment, another unnecessary prequel. The campaign sucks, the multiplayer is boring and repetitive, 5 out of 10, shouldn't have ever been fucking made. That's it for this dual-up edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series. I hope you found it informative. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace.